I'm happy in general, but I'm really very happy because it's football season. And I enjoy football season. One of the characters in football that I love so much is Lou Holtz. Lou Holtz was a longtime coach of several teams, but he won a national championship with Notre Dame, and he's a great speaker. I heard him speak one time. Tremendous public speaker, funny guy, has written several books, and is known for a lot of really pithy quotes that I kind of like. Some of my favorite Lou Holtz quotes are, "When all is said and done, more is said than done." Boy, isn't that true? And you'll never get ahead of anyone as long as you're trying to get even with him. That's a good one, that's true. And don't ever promise more than you deliver, but deliver more than you promise. And I like this one, no one ever drowned in sweat. No one ever drowned in sweat. That sounds like a nasty football coach, doesn't it? But the one that applies in the lesson this morning is this one. The one who complains about the way the ball bounces is likely the one who dropped it. When many people drop the ball, their first response is not, "Oops, I dropped the ball. Oops, I made a mistake." Their first response is usually, "Who can I pin this on?" Their first reaction is usually, "Whose fault is it?" There must be something wrong with the ball. There must be something wrong with the way it was handed to me. There must be something wrong with the coach. There must be something wrong with the rules of the game. There must be something wrong with this or that or anything, but I dropped the ball. And there are some people who spend their entire lives this way. Every dropped ball in their life is a reason to complain and a reason to place blame. And we come by that honestly. We really do. It goes back to our very first ancestors in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, who had it all. Perfection, no sin. Can you imagine a created world that was absolute perfection and with absolutely no sin? No, you can't, because none of us have ever seen it. It's beyond our imagination. And yet, Adam and Eve found a way to drop the ball. God had told them, you can do anything but this one thing. And so what did they do? That one thing. Satan tempted them, and they did that one thing. They ate the forbidden fruit. And so God asked them, have you eaten from the tree whose fruit I commanded you not to eat? And the man replied, talking about dropping the ball, the man replied, it was the woman. It was the woman. It's 2022 and men today are still saying it was the woman. Jimmy Buffett has made a lifetime in a song, Margaritaville, saying it was the woman. And then he said, it was the woman you gave me. So in the first 7 or 8 words, he blamed 2 different people. The woman and God. It was the woman's fault, or it was God's fault. It was anybody's fault but Adam's fault. But what does the Bible say? Over in the New Testament in Romans 5:12. You know whose fault the Bible says it was? Read this verse aloud with me, please. When Adam sinned, sin entered the world. Adam's sin brought death, so death spread to everyone, for everyone sinned. So let me ask you, whose fault was it? Adam's. But Adam said, no, it's Eve's. No, it's God's. need to stop fixing blame and start fixing ourselves. We need to stop fixing blame and start fixing our attitude and our actions so that we can fix the sin or the situation. As long as you're placing blame, you're only crippling yourself and playing the victim instead of the victor. In fact, do you know how to spell blame? B-L-A-M-E. Blame is you being lame. That's exactly what it is. Now, this tendency to blame can even be sin. Solomon wrote, people ruin their lives by their own foolishness, and then they're angry at God. You ever known anybody like that? You ever sat with anybody like that? As in their seat? Sure. People ruin their lives by their own foolishness, and then they're angry at God. And it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. You can turn this tendency around by deciding to take responsibility for your spiritual life. There are some specific things you can do to stop complaining and blaming and start changing. The first is, if before we quickly launch out and complain about who dropped the ball or who made me eat the fruit, if we will just stop and think, it'll go a long way toward helping us with blaming and complaining. Those who are prone to blame are also prone to talk about it to anybody else who will listen. All right? Blaming and complaining go hand in hand. You can't complain about something without shifting blame away from yourself onto someone else or to something else. And if you doubt that, let me just ask you this question. Does anybody ever come up to you and complain about themselves? Think about times when people have come up to you and complained. No, they're complaining about somebody else. Nobody ever comes up to you and complains about themselves. Of course they don't. Most people who complain are like Job. I am disgusted with my life. Let me complain freely. My bitter soul must complain. Most people who are disgusted with their life, who have ruined their lives by their own foolishness and are angry at the Lord, have to also complain to somebody else. Their bitter soul simply must complain. Most of the time, we complain and blame to avoid responsibility, in which two wrongs never make a right. Philippians 2:14 says, do everything without complaining and arguing. That's fairly inclusive, wouldn't you say? Do everything without complaining and arguing. Now, I don't want anybody to get out here and misquote me. Am I saying you can never talk to someone else about your problems? Absolutely not. The Bible says in the book of James, confess your faults one to another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. I'm not contradicting that. I'm not saying we can't talk to other people about our problems. But I am saying, listen carefully, limit the number of people you talk to about your problems to only those who can be a part of the solution. Just complaining all the time, finger pointing all the time, arguing all the time, blaming all the time, is worthless and useless and counterproductive. Let me give you a couple of examples of that. I never complain to my good friends about any health issue I have. They are not doctors. They do not have medical degrees. I went through 3 years ago here, I went through awful pain. I wasn't sure I was going to make it week to week. Didn't know what it was. First set of doctors couldn't diagnose it. Could not, and I mean literally, I would be in the bed and I'd get up and try to come preach, and I'd go home and I'd ice my back and side almost all the time. I was really, the elders knew how bad I was. The church didn't know how bad I was. And the first doctor didn't diagnose it correctly, and thank God for Brian Fyoke. He has pulled me out of the fire three times, and he got me to the right person. And then thank God for Stephen Sholey, and he gave me great advice through all that. But that's the only two I talked to. That's the only two I talked to. You know why? Because they're doctors. There was a chance they could do something for me. I didn't talk to anybody else about it. Let me tell you something. When I'm having some financial issues, I don't go to my friends about financial issues. They're as broke as I am. If I'm having some financial issues, I've gone a couple of times to Danny Osborne, one of our elders who's an accountant, or I've gone once to Braxton Roan, or to somebody who is a financial planner, or to somebody who can help me with that particular problem. In other words, the rule I have tried to live by is this. If you can't help me with a problem, why would you ever need to know about it? That's better for you, and believe it or not, it's better for me. Do you know why? Because if you stop complaining and blaming, you'll start feeling internal pressure to do something about it. Now, there weren't enough amens there right then, let me just tell you. If you stop blaming and complaining, there will be enough internal pressure for you to do something about it. I agree with you. Here's a good rule to live by. Very biblical, very spiritual. If you can do something about it, just do it. And if you can't do anything about it, why keep complaining and blaming? Now, how many of you think that makes sense? Raise your hand. All right. So then it's worth repeating. So you repeat it with me. If you can do something about it, just do it. And if you can't do anything about it, why keep complaining and blaming? That's a rhetorical question, but I'd sure love to know the answer to it. If you or nobody else can do anything about it, why keep complaining and blaming? That's just making it worse. Here's the second thing we can do. Quit looking for sympathy and start looking for victory. Victory in Jesus. Do you remember the movie A Christmas Story? If you haven't seen it, just hang on a couple of months. You'll get plenty of opportunity to, trust me. It's the story of a family's Christmas set back in the 50s, and 9-year-old Ralph here is the main character, and in one part of the movie, while feeling sorry for himself after being punished, and how he had been punished is his mother and daddy washed out his mouth with soap. Hey, guess what? I had that happen to me, too. How many of you ever had that happen to you? What'd you do? I'm curious to know. No, that was us. Tricked into that one, didn't it? But so he imagined himself, Ralph did, leaving home and coming back many years later wearing dark glasses and tapping his way along with a cane because he has lost his eyesight. And when his mother and father ask him, how did this happen? He tells them, soap poisoning. He had spent all that time thinking up ways to get back at him, remorse and regret. And another time, he wanted a BB gun for Christmas, and Ralph gets one, and he imagines himself fighting off a gang of outlaws and saving his homestead while the rest of his family is cowering in fear. He has protected them all. The guy who wrote the movie obviously remembers how 9-year-olds think. And it's why it's such a fun movie. And if you're going to have one of those two daydreams, guess which one will better serve you? That you are crippled because of soap poisoning? Or you are the hero and the victor fighting off the enemies. Well, as Major so well read for us this morning from Romans chapter 8, I know the answer to that. If God is for us, who can be against us? Because we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. I think when we complain and blame, we're playing the victim. And sometimes, if we're honest, I think we sort of relish that. We do. I think we imagine as parents or grandparents that someday our kids are going to wake up and come to us and say, you know, Mom and Dad, I know you did everything for us, but we never really appreciated it like we should have. Oh, what have we done? Or we think about our friends saying to us, oh, that poor guy, he worked so hard and he gave and he gave and he gave and he never got nothing in return. He never got the break he really deserved. There are times when you will think, this is tough. I deserve some real sympathy right now. And honestly, maybe you do. But do you know what is better than sympathy or empathy? Victory. Victory in Jesus that we sometimes sing about. And no one ever got victory through complaining and blaming and trying to get sympathy. Do you know what's better than people feeling sorry for you? Having people respect you. Because you have given them an enormous example to follow. The world simply doesn't need any more victims. The world needs a lot more victors. And that's what we're supposed to be. That's what the Bible says. I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. What shall we say about such wonderful things as these? If God is for us, who can ever be against us? Despite all these things, overwhelming victory is ours through Christ who loved us. You constantly complain and blame. You're not just saying, this situation is bigger than me. In effect, you are saying, this situation is bigger than God and what He can do for me. Yet He's the one who has promised us victory in Jesus. Some of us would rather settle for pity from people than victory in Jesus. Thankfully, Nick Vucevic is not such a person. I told his story in here 2 or 3 years ago on a Wednesday night lesson, but it so fit right here that I couldn't help but do it again. He has such an amazing story. He was born without arms and legs. And if anybody ever had an excuse to complain, Nick does. If anybody ever had an excuse to be angry at God, Nick does. If anybody had the right to have a life dependent on other people, Nick does. Instead, do you know what Nick does? He's a motivational speaker and a preacher who has traveled all over the world, started at age 17, his own nonprofit organization, and travels mostly talking to teenagers, but to others as well. But I don't want to just tell you about Nick Vucevic. This is his book, Unstoppable. I want you to see in about a 3-minute video segment about him.
I wasn't ready. I have no arms and no legs, but I'm very thankful that I have my little chicken drumstick here. People freak out when they see me for the first time. It's so cool. I was at a water slide all by myself. Everyone obviously at the bottom of the slide is looking up and waiting for other people to come down. And here I come and they're freaking out. They're like, like this. And I was so tempted to look at myself and go, what happened? And there were times where I sort of looked at my life and thinking, well, I can't do this and I can't do that. And you keep on concentrating on the things that you wish you had or the things that you wish you didn't have. And you sort of forget what you do have. And there's no point, I believe, in my life where I wish I had arms and legs, I wish I had arms and legs, I wish I had arms and legs, because wishing won't help. But what I've seen in life are just a couple key principles, and the first thing that I've seen is to be thankful. It's hard to be thankful, man. I tell you, when I was 8 years old, I sort of summed up my life and thought, I'm never going to get married, I'm not going to have a job, I'm not going to have a life of purpose. What kind of a husband am I going to be if I can't even hold my wife's hand? It's a lie to think that you're not good enough. It's a lie to think that you're not worth anything. Oh boy. Woo! It's freezing, I can't feel my hands. I love life. So many people come and say, how come you smile so much? And I'm like, well, it's a long story. But it's very simple at the same time. You see, it's very hard to smile sometimes in life. There are things that happen that you don't know and you don't understand, and you don't know if you're going to get through it. You go through your storms in life and you don't know how long this storm is going to be. And today I want to share with you some principles that I've learned in my life that you can use in yours. Being patient is beautiful. I tell you, it's the hardest thing. But I realize I may not have hands to hold my wife's hand, but when the time comes, I'll be able to hold her heart. I don't need hands to hold her heart. It is scary to know how many girls have eating disorders. It is scary to know how many people are just angry at life because of their situation at home and angry at others. It's scary to know how many people actually feel like they're worth nothing. Every single girl right here, right now, I want you to know that you are beautiful. You are gorgeous just the way you are. And you boys, you're the man.
What was that you were complaining about again? And then finally, accept your role in making things better. I just am amazed at the levels that people will go through to blame somebody else. I just am. You ever seen this thing called News of the Weird? How many of you have ever seen that? Well, it's fun until it's not. Till it really makes you mad. Now, you can't see this, and I thought maybe you'd be able to see it, but this first story right up here, right here, I will just share it with you a little. A man named Eric Edmonds went through stomach stapling surgery to cure his morbid obesity, and while he was recovering, a couple of days after the surgery in the hospital, he snuck out of his room, found a refrigerator, and raided it, and ate so much food that he burst the staples on the surgery. So you say, what did he do next? He sued the hospital for just over $250,000 for not padlocking the refrigerator to protect that refrigerator from him. And he won. Do you see how that kind of thinking can prevent a person from ever taking charge of their life? Sophocles said, "It is a painful thing to look at your own trouble and know that you yourself and no one else has made it." And it is. It is a painful thing to do that, but it's also a necessary thing to do that. I called today's message, is it your fault, God's fault, my fault, or nobody's fault? But the point is, it really doesn't matter whose fault it is. Separate IT from any of those sentences. It doesn't matter whose fault it is. Sometimes my problems are my fault. Sometimes my problems are somebody else's fault. Sometimes my problems have been allowed by God. Others of them may have been caused by God, but all situations and circumstances are either allowed or caused by God. And sometimes it's nobody's fault that we can directly point to. I can't directly say it's just a matter of we live in a sin-sick world that has been corrupted by genes, thousands of years of sin. It's nobody's fault. So the truth is, it really doesn't matter whose fault it is. The truth is, regardless of how you got to where you are today, where you go from here is your responsibility. Your attitude and your plan of action is up to you. Now, the Bible teaches that in multiple places, but it particularly teaches it that here in Galatians chapter 6. Paul said, pay careful attention to your own work, for then you will get the satisfaction of a job well done, and you won't need to compare yourself to anyone else. Would everyone burn into your brain by reading aloud with me the last sentence. For we are each responsible for our own conduct. One more time. For we are each responsible for our own. Don't you wish you could hear that some out in the world today? And that's the difference between the Bible's teaching and the world's teaching. That's the difference. Can you imagine Nick Vucevic saying, it's God's fault. It's my parents' fault. No, he said, in fact, you do your best and you trust God to do the rest. It may seem that for a little boy with no arms and no legs, the best wouldn't be very much. But I think he proved that wrong, didn't he? So today I am challenging you to make 3 specific commitments in your life. I will not complain and blame to everybody else. When I need to talk about my problems, I will talk to people who can directly be a part of the solution. I will confess my faults one to another and pray for one another that we may be healed. But I won't be a habitual complainer and blamer. 2, I will not play for the sympathy of people. I will not prefer the sympathy or the pity of people over victory in Jesus. And number 3, most importantly, regardless of how I got to where I am today, I will take responsibility for it in the future. That is my commitment. Is it your fault, God's fault, my fault, or nobody's fault? It doesn't ultimately matter. We're not trying to find fault. We're trying to find fix. We're not trying to find fault. We're trying to find forgiveness. And each one, the Bible we just read says, is responsible for his own conduct. The great news about that is, man, God's right there with his mighty power behind you, ready to help you do that. And as we've read today, if God is for us, who can be against us? And no matter what is going on in our life, we are more than conquerors through him that loved us.